Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening, listeners, and thank you for taking the time to listen to our show this evening. This is Dark Matters Radio, and I am the Sorceress Cagliastro, Blood Sorceress, Necromancer in the Hands of Nine. And tonight we're going to discuss a subject that always has a lot of interest amongst clients and students and people who want to be involved in sorcery, and that is justice. But first, let me say this evening, Victor is not with us this evening. He is otherwise engaged. And tonight we have with us morganstknight, our producer and science officer, and an individual who knows quite a bit about the number of paths, which gives this show texture. How are you this evening, Morgan?
I'm wonderful. How are you, Sorceress?
I'm good, thank you. And also with me is my co-host, Rogue Ostrowski. Chris is someone whose life experience brings him to the place where he uses sorcery in his everyday life. And welcome. Good evening, Chris. How are you?
Oh, not bad. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. So I want to talk about justice tonight. The show description, Restoring Balance, was an interesting one for me. And we have talked about editing and taking the things out that no longer enhance our life, protecting ourselves from distractions and detractors. And this week I do want to go further and discuss things that counteract those things that interact with us, that we as individuals who understand the idea of protection and all of that sort of thing have an ability to grasp. But the interesting thing to me about justice is it's one of those words, justice and revenge, are the kind of words that get people nervous. Why does it get them nervous? When you talk to people about justice and revenge in sorcery, it's sort of like saying, look, there's a cop car behind you, and you're doing the speed limit. If you're doing the speed limit, you should have nothing to worry about. And I'm talking about a perfect world, not a politically correct or incorrect world, but in a perfect world. And if you take that circumstance into consideration, then if I'm talking about justice and revenge, and you are not, and you, I mean in the sort of generic, general you, populist word, then you should have nothing to be concerned about. You should be interested in learning or not learning or going off on your way, but this conversation would not concern you. And when I say to people justice and revenge, they say, well, you know, karma and nobody has a right, and well, here's the deal. As sorcerers, we all want the same thing. We all want ultimate control over our lives, our environment, our experience, our joy. Everything that we want some kind of control over. Not control necessarily in that way that we paint the picture and make no variances and have no experiences or don't involve ourselves in spontaneity, but more so like the fact that we decide how we want to live, where we want to live, with whom we want to live, how we choose to have an existence. We also choose to be able to utilize the experiences, the techniques, the skills of sorcery in our everyday life, whether we're dealing with the enormity of relationship and our reaction in it, and how we need to control or perhaps elevate our own response to that, to something as simple as fixing your car and getting in there with the right energy to make something happen. So in this sense, sorcery is everywhere. But as sorcerers, not people just involved with sorcery on a peripheral level, not dabblers, greatest danger of all, we have a requirement. We have a requirement to look at detractors, people who approach us with malfeasance, people who try to control our experience. So when we talk about justice, we talk about editing. We talk about saying, well, there are all manner of individuals who have entered my experience who are not invited. And when that happens, we give them an opportunity to self-edit. And if they don't, then they are as Morgan wrote it in our wonderful show blurb tonight, fair game. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to talk for about an hour and offer some, I guess, an expose of what justice and revenge is. And I know revenge is not in the show description tonight, but I want to just utilize that word and its cachet to present an understanding of where we're going with this. So when we talk about justice, we're going to open the door tonight, look at it, see what it looks like, see what it feels like, see where it's necessary. We'll talk for about an hour tonight, and then next week I will do an on-air ritual that is more extensive than the usual shorter ritual that I do. And I'm going to actually offer a few options next week about justice. Sometimes justice requires getting out of the way of yourself and allowing your energy, your sorcery, if you will, to focus forward and cut something out of your life. Sometimes it involves full participation. And I want to talk a bit about those two things and how clients perceive it, how I perceive it. But first I want to open the floor a bit and see what my on-air associates think about this. Morgan, what is justice for you? When do you think you need it? What shows up?
For me, justice is about bringing balance back in a way that leaves no question that a person who has somehow infringed on the right or the freedom of another has been severely punished for it. And that bridges into a very gray area. Does it cross over into revenge? I think what I would consider revenge would be to be over and above what is necessary to restore the balance and to, in essence, punish the person who has done the evil deed, the wrong thing. When people come to me for justice, they aren't looking for this new agey type of balance. I did have one teacher I worked with very early on who would have nothing to do with this sort of work. And whenever a client came to her who had been wronged, it didn't matter whether the person had had something stolen from them, whether the person had been sexually assaulted. She refused to do any sort of revenge, any sort of punishment work. Instead, she would insist that she would only do good work to bring peace to the person. She would light peace candles. She would pray for the person and try to restore that person's sense of self-worth and balance. And I was surprised at how many people actually responded well to that. But we parted ways, and part of the reason we did is because that was just not a path that I could accept. It was, for me, basically telling the victim to suck it up and accept it, and you never have to do anything about it. So for me, when people come to me for justice, I will help them. I will hear what they have to say. I always take it with a grain of salt, however, because I know that I'm only getting one side of the story. So I have to trust my intuition to tell me just how far this person might be distorting the facts. But if someone has had a serious incident, an abusive person, sexually abused, or just physical, verbal abuse, I'm more than willing to set things right by punishing that person in any number of ways. And that, to me, is justice. Revenge would be going into an extreme where that person would be horribly mutilated in an accident or killed. And I would rarely do a work like that unless I thought that the crime in question was something that merited it. And in those cases, I don't really have people coming to me for them, but I do see them in the news. So if someone had told me, yes, this is a high-profile crime story, and I was convinced that the person was indeed guilty, I might say that in that case, just as we do in the legal system in the U.S., I might say that, yeah, capital punishment would be deserved. And if somebody came to me and asked me to do that work, I would strongly consider doing it.
Well said. Thank you, Mark. Chris, tell us about you and justice.
Well, in my work, I don't get involved in as far as who's right and who's wrong. That's not where my problem is. I won't be a moral compass. I refuse to do that. If somebody comes to me and they tell me that they've been wrong, then I will do what I am hired to do. Like I said, I don't get involved with who's right, who's wrong, who did what, who did this, and I sure as hell ain't going to sit there and, play that whole, well, we'll make everybody feel good and that'll be wonderful. No, I go sit around and hold hands and sing fucking Kumbaya and everything's going to be wonderful. I don't work that way, and I refuse to do that. You know, if you come to me for some kind of justice work, then it's to get done. It's not to play around. It's not to, oh well, maybe I don't feel like that should. No, when you need it done, you come and get me, and I will take care of it. Like I said, I don't get involved with judging people. That's not my job. My job is to take care of what's involved. You come to me and tell me this guy did this to you, okay, fine, then that's what I'll take care of.
What if you smell bullshit?
I've smelled bullshit so much it doesn't matter. I mean, it's not our job to sit, well, it's not my job to sit there and pick through it.
Well, but the idea that divination is part of this thing, I think, is valuable. I think that you can look at this through divination, no matter what kind of divination you do, and throw your own judgment on it in that sense. And I've had clients come to me who... Go ahead.
I look at it like you have your defense attorneys and you have your prosecution. Both of them have a job that they want to have done. If you really think about it, the truth doesn't matter. It's who can present the most compelling story to make 12 people believe it. Well, that's the exact same thing that they're trying to do to us. And I look at it like it's not my place to sit there and judge somebody.
Well, for me, divination is an important part of it, and it's not about me judging them. It's about when I look at them and I use some divination because I use the nothing, and I look at them and I can tell whether they're lying to me or not, and then I can choose whether or not I want to be part of this part of being a client, part of letting them be a client. I don't know if I would necessarily say yes or no to someone until I've met them in person or till I've had the opportunity to make that decision. Because sometimes someone comes to me and I know they're just pissed off at someone who might not even really know them. And those are important pieces of information. I'm not judging the situation. I'm just using divination. Do you use divination at all in this process?
I don't know if it's called divination or not. I mean, I can tell when somebody's lying to me. I know I can. And I've called people out on it many a times. When it comes to something like this, it all depends on what they're asking me to do. I mean, everybody's got a story and everybody's got something that, there's two sides. There's your side, there's my side, and then there's the truth. And that's how the take that I get on this. Either side's going to tell me something different. Now, sometimes it's to the point where I don't know if I'll take the whole thing because it sounds too much like bullshit. I mean, I just might say, this is way too complicated. I'm not going to get involved in this. Because if I got to dig around that much to find out what the truth is, then it's not worth my time, number one. And I don't need something blowing up in my face either. I worry more about the repercussions coming back on me. My reputation, the people that come and work with me and things like that. It's like, I don't need that.
Well, let me just jump in here for a second, because I think that the direction I want to stay in tonight is talking about what the justice work is. And each of us has a methodology, if you will, to step into this process. And there's a couple of things that both of you said that I want to comment on. Morgan used the word punished for it, and that's an interesting term to me, because punished to me doesn't necessarily mean punished the way other people see punished. The legal system, if it was a pure thing, is built so that someone is simply taken out of the loop, taken away from the opportunity to repeat the action. That's what it's intended to do. Whether it does that or not, that's a conversation for another show about criminal justice, and that's not what we're talking about. But that's the intention. So if we sit on that intention, and someone says to me, for example, somebody's stalking them, making their life unbearable, looking in their windows, I have some opportunities there. I can either stop that person from doing that in any manner of ways. I can make that person become disinterested. I can make that person forget the person that they are stalking. And these are all things that do what justice really is, which is simply take them out of the loop of the action and make them incapable of continuing the action. When someone is punished, they have an understanding that they participated in the action and there's something taken away from them above and beyond the experience of being able to continue the action. That's what punishment is. So for me, there's a widening funnel here. You know, there are enormous infractions and there are smaller infractions, and one must address them accordingly. If someone has infringed upon your life, and I think it was Morgan who used the word infringed, then what does that mean? Have they made it impossible for you to keep your dogs in the yard, or have they tried to kill your child? You know, or have they, raped and attacked someone, or have they stolen someone's materials and made it impossible for them to make a living? These are all very different. These are all very different attacks. So the idea of someone infringing upon your rights or infringing upon your right to forward movement and to enjoying your life is a very wide funnel. And I think that it is important when we're dealing with justice to balance out the reaction. And I've had people come to me and say, so-and-so is stalking me, looking in my windows and everything. Can you kill him? And that, to me, is not a response that is equal to the power of the infringement. And the infringement itself has power. So I like to create a really linear picture of what justice is. If somebody is peeping in your windows and stalking you, then we do one of the things we talked about, making it impossible for them to do so. There's a difference between that and shutting them down. So when people come to me, I immediately go right to divination. I mean, I'm a sorceress, but this is what I do. This is my only job. This is my life. This is what my commitment is to. This is what the gazillion books I've written are about, is to utilize all of your skills. And if you don't have skills, then you don't put yourself in a position to enact justice. I think that is a very important statement. Justice is not healing. Justice is not getting somebody a job. Justice is now infringing upon the life of the individual who has done the deed. That doesn't make it not necessary sometimes, but it does make it something that you have to consider. The punishment, on some level, if there is punishment, should fit the infringement. I won't use the word crime. I'll say the infringement. So, Morgan, what do you think about any of that?
I think it's well said, because there has to be a degree. And I get people coming to me, and I've had people come to me to kill their lover because they found out their lover was cheating on them. Does infidelity merit me actually going out and killing someone? I don't think so. And it's not necessarily, in my mind, about a large stack of right or wrong. It's about the amount of energy that I have to put out in order to do a particular action. If I am going to kill an individual, that requires a great deal more energy, a great deal more commitment on my part. And I'm unwilling to do that, regardless of whatever price I'm offered, if I feel that the action is too overblown for what was actually done to hurt the individual who's come to me for some sort of rectification. You mentioned the person who was peeping in the window, and I want to bring up one of my favorite Greek myths is the myth of Actaeon. Actaeon was a hunter, and one day he was going through the woods, and he happened to come across a quiet pool where the goddess of the hunt, Artemis, was bathing. And she was there with her nymphs, and she expected that it would be private. And any sensible human seeing that, would have turned his eyes away in modesty or at least shame, because there she was naked. But he sat there ogling her, and she finally turned around, saw him there leering at her. She picked up a handful of water, threw it on him, and he immediately turned into a stag. And his own hunting hounds attacked him and tore him to bits. That was her idea of justice and her idea of punishment. I think in some cases, regardless of whether the act itself may seem minor, such as peeping at someone, there's a point at which you look at how it affects the person who is being affected. And that is where the real cost of the action comes in. Infidelity, well, does it mean that I would kill a person who was unfaithful to their lover? Not necessarily, but if someone came to me and said, hey, my lover was unfaithful to me, and they went out and got a sexually transmitted disease, and then they gave it to me, I might consider severe punishment in the form of, I don't know, I wouldn't say maiming a person, but severe injury to a person, perhaps taking away their ability to perform sexually at all, or even to the point of what the old people used to call it, blighting their members or blighting their organs, punishing them in a way that would give them perhaps a cancerous disease or another disease that would necessitate the removal of the organs in question so that they could never do something like that again. I tend to be a little heavy-handed sometimes when I'm asked to dole out justice, but I think that if I have the sense that a person has really and truly been injured, and I can sense that wave of injury coming off of them, regardless of what the action was that precipitated that injury, I'm more than willing to go the extra mile to ensure that they are compensated emotionally.
What about sorcerers who, and thank you for that, because I think that was fantastic. What about sorcerers to whom you can go hand X amount of thousands of dollars and they will take somebody down? Now, I have to be very clear about this. I think there are very few of us who can do it. I think there are very few of us who can deliver what I refer to as the heart shot. I think there are very few of us who can deliver a disease. I think there are very few of us who can scramble somebody's mind to the point where they can't function anymore or any longer, or at least not function well. I think that most of the people who say they can do that cannot. I'd like to see the data. I'd like to see the proof. So, well, actually, I don't even care. But the point is that I say that because there are many people who will tell you that they can do that. Understand when you go to somebody who says they can do that, you are truly putting out a hit. And that is something that you have to deal with. I do not accept the concept of karma. I want to be really clear about that. I say this all the time, but this is a really good time to jump in there and mention it. Karma to me is a control factor built by the social norms that make us worry about everything that we do. I have a much more severe version of this. It's called responsibility. You have to take a certain responsibility for what you do. If someone comes back to me a year later and said, did you do this sorcery? I will say yes. I'm completely transparent about that, unless, of course, I am covering the privacy of the client. And that's a particular kind of situation. But just generally speaking, this work is both an art and a science. I want to be really clear about that. I developed, studied, worked, created, offered, wrote about, and teach the science of sorcery. This is a very particular thing that we do here in my world and in the way that I do things. The art is deciding when to enact and how to enact. The science is just about pushing the energy around. So there is a very personal involvement in this kind of an activity. And it is important for us as sorcerers to remember that. Look, if somebody comes to me for the other extreme of this, somebody comes to me because they've been trying to get pregnant for 5 years and they are having infertility problems, and people come to me for this all the time. I'm making a decision to create an environment in which a human being will be born. That is no less important. It's no less confusing. It's no less extraordinary than deciding that somebody is so dangerous that their life must be taken out of the loop. So when we talk about justice, we have to be very, very careful in the description, because all the words that flow into justice are always revenge, punishment. We start immediately talking about death. We start talking about all these things. And yes, those things are all valid and part of the story. However, let me say this. If one is raised by incapable parents, or parents who are greedy in some way, or parents who are controlling in some way, parents who treat their children as projects, and I don't want to get into the particulars of parenting because that's, again, another show. And the client comes to me as a resulting individual who has had the experience of this kind of control and wants justice for what was done to them. I'm now looking at a person who might be, for example, 30, and who has lived their entire childhood controlled by their parents. Parents are still in their lives. What am I supposed to do? Knock off the parents? How does that help the client? And this is the nuance. This is when we get serious. This is the important thing. The justice there has to be something, and this is super important, something that affects the client in a way that makes their life better. So if I knock off the parents, or make them vegetables, or incapable of communicating, or make them want to walk in circles and not be able to speak in full sentences, how does that pay off to the client? So to me, justice is a two-edged process, where that kind of control has to be handled in such a way where it paints a positive or the desired outcome for the client. If these parents cannot stay away from their 30-year-old child and cannot leave that person alone and cannot let them have a life, then I will separate them so that they can no longer communicate. And then there's other work underpinning all that has to be done to restore the sense of self-control to the client. But what about these complex situations? I mean, Chris, you have people who come to you with stuff their relatives have done to them all the time. Where do you stand on that?
It all comes back to I ask them what they want me to do. And they'll say, I want you to do this. And then I'll look at them and say, okay, but this is what I'm going to do. Because it all comes down to where does justice come into playing? Just like you were saying, if somebody won't leave you alone, right away, I go, well, let's kill them. Well, you can't go kill everybody. That don't work that way. I mean, as much as we like to, and I mean, there's plenty of people out there that, I could pick off on a daily basis, that you can't do that. It's just not right. So you have to figure out, where does the justice come in? Where exactly are you getting something for them? And the other part of that is, how much are they willing to put into this? I'm not going to carry this all on myself. You're going to do a little bit of the work too. You're going to get me some things I need. You're going to take care of things like this. You're not going to invite them over for Christmas and every friggin' weekend for dinner like you've been doing if you want them out of your life. You're not going to run to your parents all the time when you need money like you've been doing. All kinds of things like that come into play. It's got to come down to what we're going to do for these people, but we can't be the only ones doing it. We can't carry all the work. Just like when I was a mechanic, I could change the oil in your car, but if you're not bringing it back to me until it's got 100,000 miles on the oil, I can't help it when the engine locks up. You've got to take a little responsibility in this too. And that's what I tell people, that, you've got to put some kind of work into this. I've got to get you, you're going to do some of this. You're going to get your hands dirty too. Because this is, I'm not doing this for myself. I'm doing this for you, and you've got to be part of it.
Well, where does the client come in here? What is the client willing to accept?
Well,
I think
like
that's
I said,
important.
You come down to, if I need to banish them or something like that, I'm going to need pieces of that person. Well, that shouldn't say that. I sound like Jeffrey Dahmer. But, I'm going to need hair, the basic stuff, things like that. that I can make a talisman out of or whatever, and get it to. But then when I make that, you can't keep inviting them over to the house. You've got to cut some ties here. If you're enabling them to do this, then I can't help you.
Sometimes some of the sorcery is on the client. I'm transparent about that. I tell them that. I said that if you have an anger problem, then we have to deal with that as well. Morgan, do we have any comments in the chat room that might be useful in this conversation?
We do. We have a great one from Jonathan, who says that he believes people are into sorcery sometimes in haste to really go after someone, murder or gravely injure them, because they perceive it to be, there is some crackling in here. I'm not sure where it's coming from.
Okay, I think that's better now.
But yeah. Okay. It's saying that it may be easier and not as easy for authorities to catch you or to punish you than go after out-and-out violence, physical violence. And he says if you wouldn't consider harming someone physically, you shouldn't turn to sorcery to do it. I have to agree that I do believe a lot of people do turn to sorcery because it is certainly, in terms of legal system, the witchcraft laws have long been off the books in this country and in most other countries too. So you're not going to be prosecuted for it. A prosecutor would be laughed out of court if he tried to bring you up on a charge of witchcraft. And then there's also the little bit of the safety factor. You're not directly involved with the person. If you go after a person and you have a knife in your hand, well, that person may be able to take that knife away from you and do you some injury. It's a little bit how that with sorcery. I will say, though, that it takes, when people come to me at least, and that this may be different for you, Sorceress, and you, Chris, but when people come to me, they've thought about it. And they're still, and they will come to me and say, this happened 2 weeks ago, and I can't let it go. And I really want to do some grave injury to the person. And I think that if it was a heat of the moment thing, where we could all just wave the proverbial wand and blast a person, there would be a lot of self-recrimination and a lot of regrets if anybody really did have that power. But we do work in real time with sorcery, so we do have to be a little bit careful before we go out on it. However, when a client comes to me, I'm not as personally invested in it. And they've, like I said, typically had time to think about it and to hone down what they really want. Now, for some people, having time to think about it means they've had time to stew about it and they've worked themselves up into a frenzy. But that's where my part comes in determining whether they're asking for something that is justifiable, whether they're going overboard and asking me to do way too much for the situation at hand. And as I said earlier, it's all because this is my time and energy that I have to invest. And that's one of the reasons I hold back on it.
Morgan,
sure.
I want to jump in here because there's something important that I need to say. And I think what you just said was very, very important. But I want to address Jonathan, and this is going to be one of those shows people are going to talk about. We're only going to do an hour, so tonight it's going to be visceral. First of all, I can wave a wand and put somebody out. It isn't a wand per se, but I can do it, and I have done it. And in the worst situations, I'd do it again. So I want to be really clear that sometimes sorcery is in the moment. And that is just, for me, a word that I almost never use, a fact. It can be done. Second of all, when we talk about justice, justice is about keeping the other person out of the loop of repeating what they do, keeping them away. And sometimes the client has to understand that that is what they're coming to us for. There's a very big chasm between justice and revenge. Although those two words constantly overlap one another, the important thing to remember is that we have to ask this question to the client. Are you coming to me so that your life gets better or that guy's life gets worse? This is a really important question. Are you coming to me because your lover slept with somebody else and you can't break away from them and it's toxic for you? Or are you coming to me because your lover slept with somebody else and you want them to be found dead somewhere? Not an equal response to the action, I will tell you that much. Because to me, Taking them out of the loop is taking them out of the loop. It's not necessarily taking them out of their life. And that's very, very important. When somebody says to me their lover has slept with somebody else, I'm just using this as an example, so all listeners, don't get over-involved in this particular example. When someone says that to me, I have to create a new situation in the client's life where the contact is broken. That's what I have to do. And the justice is that it is now a new place, a new plane, a new way of looking at things, a new way of being free. That's justice. If somebody breaks into your house and rapes you in the middle of the night, and they get out and they run down the street and nobody catches them, they can do it again. If somebody breaks into your house in the middle of the night and rapes you and runs down the street and somebody grabs that guy, throws him to the ground, there's a trial and he goes to jail, that's justice. That's the deal. The deal is he's taken out of the loop of being able to knock on somebody else's window, break through, and do it again. That's what justice is. And to think that sorcery cannot put somebody out just like that is something I want to be careful about, because I don't think that people understand what sorcery necessarily is. And, Morgan, your point was when they come to you, it could be weeks later. When they come to me, it's years later. When they get to me, they've been to everybody else. When they get to me, they've been to their therapist, they've been to the police, they've been to the witch doctor, they've been to every divinator, they've been to everyone they can find, except maybe Morgan, except maybe Chris. And when they get to me, they want it done. So that seems to be how it works. I have this reputation as being the final stop on this train. I have a reputation for that because that's what I do. So when you come to me, understand I'm going to look straight in the face. I'm going to ask you what happened. You're going to tell me. I'm going to throw divination on it. I'm going to know if you're full of it. I'm going to know if the story that you're telling me is a story that actually happened, or the second category, a story that happened and now is enhanced by your angst, or the third category, which is it's all lies. And I will know in the moment because that's what I do. There's no gray area. And I will respond appropriately. And I love what Jonathan asked, which was, would you do something to a person with sorcery that you would not do? I think the question is would not could not. And would you, if you could walk up to them and stab them in the heart, would you do it? If you knew you could just walk away, would you do it? Because if that's what you're asking me to do, then that's what you're carrying. And I don't mean in karma. I don't mean in your soul. I mean in your intellect. That's the story you have to carry around, is that you went to someone who put somebody out like a cigarette for you. So if you want to carry that, then ask very carefully for that. But your reasoning has to be really good. For me, it has to be, that's the only way to stop this individual from continuing the act they perpetrated upon you and may perpetrate upon others. And that is really what justice is for me. So thoughts on that?
I do want to bring up something that Darren had mentioned in the chat room and said that to him, justice is also giving the person a sense of power back, the person who is the victim who is coming to us for the justice, and giving them a sense of power. And I think that that's very true. I think it really is, because they are taking control of the situation. I may not be able to, let's say I'm just an ordinary person on the street and I find I have cancer. Well, I know I can't cure myself, so I do turn it over to a professional, someone who is an expert in this matter. And he treats me and he gets rid of the cancer. But because I took that step rather than folding in on myself in grief or in fear or in self-pity, I went out and actively did something to address the issue. I think that's very, I think that's a very powerful thing. If you can't do it yourself and you find someone who can do it for you, I still think you're reclaiming your power. And I think that's part of what good justice magic does, effective justice magic does.
I agree with you. Going to a professional is just, for most people in most situations, for most things that are serious. And I said it exactly that way because that's exactly what I meant. Going to a professional is a good idea. And go to a professional to obtain the outcome you would obtain yourself if you could. A similar kind of outcome, and that is empowering. When clients come to me and they want justice and they want revenge and they want all this, I say to them, what you want is your life back. That's what you really want. If you could roll this back to the day before that happened, you'd do it. Even if in the moment you're so pissed off, you're so angry, you're so out of control, even in the moment you're so hurt, you're so damaged, you look at your life as now a result of somebody else's actions. If you could roll it back to the hour before this happened, you would do it. So for me, the responsibility of justice is that second layer of giving something back to the client, and I don't mean giving back in that sort of New Agey way. I mean actually giving something back to the client, a sense of strength, a sense of fearlessness. And, you know, for anyone who doesn't know it, anyone who hasn't listened to me speak a million times, fear is just one. The way that I describe fear is that it is inconvenience and not knowing what to do next. If someone's living in that kind of fear, if they can't walk out their door without somebody stalking them or without something happening to them relating to one individual in particular in their lives, then that's not a life of quality. That's horrific. If they can't sleep, if they can't think, if they're always looking over their shoulder. And whether it's a human being or a demon in some cases that's interacting with them, that's giving them a lack of a life of joy or taking away their freedom, the responsibility of the sorcerer, in my mind, is to complete the whole circle of things. And then to say to the person, and now you can go for a walk. And now you can sleep. And now you can live your life. Because if I'm not delivering that, then I haven't done the job at hand. Chris, what do you think about that?
Oh, I agree. Just like part of, like I said earlier, about me having them do things, you know, as part of the process, you'd be surprised that by doing things, they end up being more empowered than what they were, as far as they're getting like some sense of worth. You know what I mean? Like, I can stop this. I can stop this. I don't need anybody else to do this for me anymore. I can stop this. You know, it's like you needed that good boot in the ass, and that's what we do sometimes. I mean, sometimes we don't have an answer. Maybe sometimes what we do is boot them in the ass so that they do it themselves.
Well, but is that what they're looking for, though?
In some cases, yeah. I mean, I honestly think that. They might not know it when they come to us, but they're coming to us because they feel helpless. You know, if you could help yourself, you would. And
No, go ahead, finish. Sorry.
I think it's kind of like what Morgan said about having cancer. It's like you don't know how to fix it. So you go to somebody that does know how to fix it. But now if I tell you, you know, using the cancer thing that, okay, I want you to do this and I want you to do that, and I'm going to help you with this here, and you're going to feel more empowered. You're going to feel better because I'm having you do things. You know, you're part of your cure. You're part of what's fixing you. And, you know, like you said, we said at the beginning of the show that, you know, part of the time what we're doing is we're fixing the client instead of fixing the problem around them.
Right. That's true. Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the justice comes down to what's wrong with you. You know, why can't you stop this? You know, maybe it's just you don't have the ability to do it, you don't have the mindset to do it, or you don't have the tools to do it. And I think in some cases that we're giving them the tools to do it.
So we're giving them free space to fix themselves?
I don't know so much if it's free space, but we're giving them the ability to.
By free space, I mean space without a predator.
It could be. Jared, notice how with kids, if you don't tell them they're doing that, I had a 15-year-old stepdaughter at the time, and she had a pair of shorts that she bought, and I didn't particularly care for them because of how short they were. And instead of hitting it directly and saying, look, you're not going to wear them, I just looked at her one day and I said, you really like them? And she said, yes. What's wrong with it? I said, well, they make your ass look fat. Well, they went back to the store the following day. Why? You just have to use the right terminology and the right ability, and they see what's wrong with it. It's the same situation with their lives. It's like they don't see what's wrong and they don't know how to fix it without us standing there and going, well, this is what you got to do.
But sometimes they want you to just knock the other guy down. And sometimes that's what they really need, is for you to knock the other guy down. Look, I'm nobody's therapist, and I'm nobody's best friend. I'm not looking for friends, and I'm not looking to be somebody's therapist. I don't want to hear every piece of minutia of their life. That being said, the wisdom that I've developed from having this kind of client interaction is often helpful to individuals who come to me and have something to say that needs to be looked at, whether they should even be seeking this kind of interaction. Sometimes that's what happens. And I am not of the school of making someone feel bad about coming to me and having a discussion with me about it. I'm also not willing to do every case that walks through the door. And the reason I'm not willing to do every case that walks through the door is because some of it just doesn't add up for me. But when we talk about what a client is experiencing, we want to give them back the free space. By free space, I mean a place where they can be without the predator. That's what I mean by when I talk about giving them back their power. Giving them back their power in terms of restoring their energy, restoring their sensibilities, all that, that's another kind of sorcery. That has to do with filling in voids. Because when you take away the predator, and this will be something I talk about more next week when we do an actual ritual, when you take away the predator, what happens is a void opens. In physics, we all know all voids get filled. If the void is made from, and I use this example all the time because it's a really clear one, if a void is made by blowing air really hard into the water and you stop the air, what happens is the thing that's the heaviest and the nearest falls back into the void, and that's the water, and it's always the thing that the person is the most familiar with. So if somebody comes to you because they have an abusive lover or an abusive housemate, which is something that has become more common in the last 10 years, not necessarily a partner but a housemate, and you do what you need to do to get rid of that housemate, I can tell you if you don't fill that void, in 2 weeks there'll be an ad on Craigslist and there'll be another abusive housemate living in that other room, because that's what people do. They do what they know how to do. The heaviest and most nearby thing fills the void. Their understanding of how to get a roommate and what a roommate looks like is the heaviest and most nearby thing, and that will fill the void. So what is necessary, what is required in terms of the integrity of this work is to say, okay, I have removed the predator. What are you going to fill it with? There's a space in your life now. You don't have to look over your shoulder. You don't have to lock your bedroom door inside at night and put the chair up against it. You don't have to get a big dog. You don't have to do any of those things. But what are you going to fill it with? You're walking around now in this freedom, in this space without a predator. What will you put in it? To me, justice requires filling that void, or at least explaining to the client what it means to not fill that void with a replica of what they have just walked away from. This is a very important thing. We all know people who are in their 10th abusive relationship. We all know people who hoard things that are going to cause them to not live a lifestyle that's important. We all know people who get in with the same kind of group of people all the time, and it drags them down. Every single one of us knows people like that. As a sorceress, it is my responsibility to close the loop. So that's why I'm saying I do need to understand the contextual aspects of the problem. I do need to understand the whole thing. When they come to me, they've come to everybody else. Very few people start their trek towards using an external force of sorcery or something with me. They come to me after they've tried other people. I don't want to judge that. I don't even want to get into what that's about. I just want to say that it is important to know that in the integrity of the work for me is to close the loop. Morgan, you do this. You do this when you give them something to leave with. that will help them process what happens. Isn't that what you do?
Yes, I do. And they have to know that they're going to be part of the solution. I'm always saying this on the show, and I'm always saying this to my clients. You have to be, you're not just going to be in the same pattern. You have to contribute your energy and your will to this as well. And if I have any idea that they're going to go back, and this happens quite a bit. It happens in relationships, but it happens not just necessarily in romantic relationships. It happens in life situations. A person is in a particular mindset. They're in a particular role. They've adopted a role for themselves, and that is the only role they're going to play, and it's like a little television mini drama. Everybody else has their role to play in their particular life. And if one cast member dies, well, then, you just bring the understudy in, and that person will fill that exact same role. They never change the plot. They never change the script. And that's something that I have to constantly drum into people. If you're going to continue to go on down this path, if you're going to continue to put yourself into situations where you're going to be hurt, then I can help you this time, and I can help you 20 more times. But we're going to end up getting into a codependent relationship, and I absolutely refuse to get into codependent relationships with my clients. It's not, you'll come to me every 5 months because something else has gone wrong with your life. No, my job is to make sure that that I help you get your life back into balance, whether it's justice, whether it's some sort of realignment of what the energy is around them so that they are no longer facing blockages. I will do that. But the situation has to change. It's not about rotating the pieces. It's not about moving the problems around. It's all about eliminating the problems altogether.
Brilliant. Rotating the pieces. You're absolutely right, Morgan. That's what people do. They rotate the pieces. They look for what's familiar. They live it again. They don't understand that there is always, and when I say this, people say, but what about this example and that example? There is always participation from the victim in some kind of interaction. It doesn't mean intentional participation. It just means participation. It just means that they did something, and not that they didn't have a right to. One has a right to sleep quietly in their bed, but they had an activity that they did that led to an opening. I'm not blaming the victim, for somebody else to do something that is untoward towards them. And some people don't know how to not create those openings. Sometimes that part of the work is necessary. Sometimes somebody does something to you and the outcome is not the outcome that you thought it was going to be. So people say to me all the time, well, the outcome wasn't as bad as the action. And I'm wondering, is anybody talking about that? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, there is one comment somewhat related to that. Ava Morgana gave us a scenario, and she said, let's say someone comes to you, wants you to take care of someone who stole their job. And now you as the practitioner know, which is our job to know, or at least sense some of these things, that they are actually now in a position to get a better job. This person who believes that they've been wrong because this has happened, it has left an opening in their life for them to move on and to move up. And so in a roundabout way, you could say the person who stole their job did them a favor, but I don't really like to use terms like that because I don't think the person was saying, I'm going to be such a nice guy. I'm going to steal this person's job, and it's going to be so good for them. They probably knew what they were doing. But the client still wants, but the client still wants to do something. Well, if you know that they're now in a better position, how do we rectify that? Do we do the justice anyway against the person who has done this bad thing to them? Or do we say, well, actually, because good things are coming your way, there's no need for rebalance? And I'm going to leave that to the two of you. I have my own personal views, but I want to hear what both of you have to say about that.
Well, I'll tell you what I have to say about that. I say to the client, what do you want? How much effort do you want to put into this thing? You are one scumbag down if that happens. That's what I say. There are things happening for you that are going to be useful. This is what I see. This is what they are. But if you feel that enacting some kind of justice on that person is what you need to get to a place where you feel like you have done something and not just taken it this time, then we go ahead and we do something. That's really what it comes down to. What does the client want? I'm in a position where I don't take every client that comes to me, and sometimes a client comes to me with one thing and wind up doing something completely different, and I think that's what Ava Morgan is asking. And I will say to them, what do you want? What's the most important story in your head right now? I ask people that all the time. Today, what is the thing that you want? Do you want a job that you go to that's better than this, gives you joy, makes you feel stronger, gives you opportunity and responsibility, or do you want to focus on making this person's life miserable? I'm not saying one of those things is good and the other one is bad. We're all adults here. I'm saying you have some options, and I deal with it at the client level. Chris, what do you do?
Well, that majority of my work is healing. As far as working with people that are sick and things like that. And it all comes down to, okay, you might be looking at a better job, but how are you going to be mentally and physically going into that job if this isn't taken care of? Is this the one thing that you need to get, to stand up for and get it done so that you come out better? Just because a job's better doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be better because of it. Which is going to make you better? Which is going to make the person a better person? I've quit jobs that were fantastic jobs because they were crazy. I mean, you can't work like that, and what they were asking me to do was asinine. So where do you draw the line? It's like, are you going to say, okay, if I do this, then I'm going to feel better mentally, and I'm going to feel better, which will make me better physically? Or am I going to just say, let this guy screw me over because I know another job's coming? Well, are you going to be a doormat, or are you going to stand up for yourself? That's what you got to ask yourself.
Well, it comes down to asking the client what they want. Like, where are you today? Where are you today? What do you want today?
It's like, what's
and that's
your
what I'm saying.
choice?
People come to me for one thing. They don't always leave with that thing. They leave with what they decide in that moment is a better choice for them. And there are situations where I will say to somebody, tell me your story, and that story is so profound, the damage is so severe, that I'm now looking at a damaged person who cannot tell me what they want. But what I get from that is that there is a predator out there who must be stopped. In that case, and those cases happen, I look at that in a different way. I say, you know what, I'm going to take myself out of the client's head. I'm just going to go deal with that individual. And in that sense, I get to decide what the punishment is. I get to decide what the justice is. I get to decide what happens, because in a case like that, the client cannot tell me really what they think is the best choice. I have situations where the client is disincarnate. This happens to me more times than I would really like to get into talking about. A disincarnate will come to me and say, I have been killed. I committed suicide because of what this person was doing to me. These things happen. This is a really bizarre frequency to talk about, but it does happen. I don't see a huge difference between the disincarnate and the living. So when this happens, it is now my job, if I choose to take that on, and say, I'm going to take this guy out of the loop. And I decide what out of the loop means. Sometimes that's necessary. Being a sorceress is not a job that is for the lighthearted. This is the hardest work one can do. Because when you can sit in your home, or you can sit in your car, you can walk down the street, and you can change stuff just by and I say just, after decades of work, it's just by manipulating the energy around you. This is an enormous responsibility. Everybody who gets into this work, I say it all the time, I'll say it again, I'll say it until everybody's heard it. Everybody who gets in this work because they want to enact some kind of control in their life. That's why we do it. We want to be able to pick and choose. And being able to change things, so the manipulation of energy, is the maximum example of being able to pick and choose. Sometimes somebody comes to me in a dream, and I don't really mean a dream, those of you who know what I'm talking about. Somebody's injured, somebody's in a coma, and they say to me, the guy who did this is this, and nobody will pick him up because he's not even a suspect. And I look at it, and I do divination on it, and I take care of it. Sometimes I'm the hitman. That's the deal. And this is that kind of work. This is not light and fluffy work. This is work where I have to take on the responsibility, because I don't accept karma, of the work that I do. I think that's really important stuff. Any thoughts on that or anything in the chat room that addresses that?
Well,
Morgan?
I think that, I think a big part of it, there is actually a pretty active discussion going on in the chat room on various angles that we've got, not directly to that, but yeah, I think that we as sorcerers do have to make the decisions ultimately. Because the biggest decision we make is yes or no. Do we take the case or not? And then after that, it's a matter of refining that decision and accepting responsibility for making the initial decision, yes or no, do we take the case, and then how far do we take it. But there's so much that it just gets to be overwhelming almost if you stop and try to put it in, if you stop and think about it a lot. I think some people, and I will include myself in this upon occasion, might get paralyzed just because it is an enormous responsibility. And the only way to carry through with it, I think, is to just move forward with the work, to just keep going through and trust your instincts and know that you are doing what is appropriate for the situation. If you have those second thoughts or those doubts, then that is going to be fatal. It's going to ruin everything you're doing to the client, but it could be fatal to you as well. And that's a real big thing. This is not, as you mentioned, light, fluffy work. This is dangerous work. If you want to be a light, fluffy person, well, you can go and you can teach theoretical physics. If you want to be a person who's down and dirty, you go to the particle accelerator and you do the experiments and you realize that, yes, well, perhaps something you do one day will actually open up a black hole in the particle accelerator that will swallow up the Earth. Unlikely, but it could happen. So there are the people who are the dilettantes who just play around. Yeah, well, that would be. Not that we would be around to enjoy it, but it would be. But there are the dilettantes who play at this, and there are the people who just get out and do it. And the ones who get out and just do it are the ones who are able to make those decisions right there in the moment without any doubt, without any really overthinking the whole thing. And those are the people who are the most effective sorcerers.
Not to be a giant jackass, but I have to ask this question. How can it kill us? I know what's been under my belt is not what most people can say is under their belt. And I know that I've done work that most people would cringe about, and I've done work in the last 10 days most people would cringe about. Maybe because of my background, maybe of what I come from, I never had to learn the part about we shouldn't take out the bad guy. I come from we should take out the bad guy. So for me, I don't really understand why it could. Your language was it could kill them, it could kill us. Sometimes after the whole thing is over and I think about it and the client's left and it's all settled and done and the guy's in jail or the woman's in jail or whatever, I continue working on them anyway because what they did was so pervasive they need to be reminded of it every single night for an hour and a half during nightmares in which they peel the skin off their face. I'm good with that. This is ugly work. I can create a situation where a person is healed. I can create a situation where a person will never heal. And those things are not two sides of the same coin. They're exactly the same coin. That's the work. We're just moving energy around. And when you do that kind of work, it's all visceral. There's nothing to me less or more visceral between removing a tumor and putting somebody who has caused someone to live in pervasive angst in a situation where they're in that loop now, by themselves and experiencing it over and over and over. There is an individual who I keep in a nightly assault. Every single night in his nightmares, somebody comes into his house and beats him to near death. And then he wakes up and it didn't happen. And he has become nearly immobilized from this experience. because there are 3 young girls he did that to, and he got away with it. And for the rest of his life, whether it's a month, 2 months, or another 60 years, every single night of this guy's life, he will experience the beating he gave to these 3 girls. That's the deal. It doesn't matter to me whether or not that feels ugly. I don't carry it. I don't carry it now. It's just a done deal. It's what someone comes to me to do. And I know that I'm wired differently, and I know that there are a few people wired like me, but I'm wired differently. Because when I was a little kid, I understood that if the bad guy is coming at you, you take him out. So I think this is why people come to me last, because they know when they come to me, they're going to get that solution. Thoughts?
Well, I agree. Like I said earlier in the evening, it's not my job to decide what your moral compass is. You come to me for a job, and that's what I do. You can't have second thoughts with this work. It just don't work that way. When you have to second guess yourself is when you start screwing up. And I've said that before too. We have to know what the hell we're doing. We all have enough experience that we shouldn't even have to think about what the hell comes next. The only time that I can see that we run into a problem of hurting ourselves is now, when we have to do exorcisms or things like that. I mean, where we have things that can get a little out of control and it can change real quick in any kind of given moment. But I don't foresee a situation where there's too many, where a human interaction is going to cause us a whole lot of problems, with doing what we're doing. I just don't see that. I haven't experienced it anyway. It
doesn't cause me problems. It feeds me. I'm a monster. I accept it.
Yeah.
And by this I mean that if you look at what's out in the world and the kind of work that I do and the kind of work other people do, I'm in the monster category. I'm in the category where if you want to be healed and you are really broken and damaged and you come to me, then I'm your best friend in the whole world and I fixed you and I'm a wonderful person. And if you come to me and you say that you're hiding because you beat the shit out of 3 young girls and you want me to try to help you hide, I'm going to say, I'll give you a place to hide in your own nightmares. I get what it means to be a monster because I am one. When people come to me, they come to me because they've tried everything else and they didn't get paid. Not everything else. And I'm not saying I'm the only person in the world that can do this. I'm really clear. But I'm saying that they've tried many other situations and they didn't get paid, by which I mean they still have fear, they still have concern, they still wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat thinking somebody's going to come at them. They're still trying to pedal backwards to restore the life that was stolen from them, whether it was their property or their well-being or their sanity or whatever. So when they come to me, they're about ready to get the job done. Sometimes I think they know about it and they wait that long because they're not ready. This evening has been an incredible discussion. This is only part 1 of this. And as I mentioned in the beginning of the show, we were going to go about an hour tonight because I have another thing that I must do. Next week we're going to do the 2 hours. And I want to pick this up where it is now. This is great. This has been a very powerful conversation, and I'm excited about that. And then I want to go on and talk about a couple of rituals, a couple of ways that things can be done. I'm going to be talking about poisoning, and by which I mean putting down on someone something that is toxic and destroys them, and that being something that is done when they need to be taken out of the loop. I'm going to talk about a void closing. I'm going to talk about a lot of things, and I'd like to open that up to Chris and Morgan, and if Victor's with us, but he doesn't do ritual in the same kind of way. So let's talk about how to seal the deal we've talked about tonight. Quickly, Morgan, how to find you?
Yes, you can find me on Facebook. Well, actually, I don't do Facebook anymore. You can find me at morganstknight@hotmail.com. You can also find me through my book's website. The book is Curse of Prometheus, A Tale of Medea, and the book website is called talesofmedea.com. I do want to thank everybody who participated in the chat room tonight. It was wonderful. Chris, Ava Morgana, and Chad, and everybody else who contributed. Thank you very much. It was a lively discussion.
Thank you, Morgan. Chris, take it.
You can find me on Gmail at chrisrogueostrowski at gmail.com, and you can also find me on Facebook at my Hell's Rogue webpage.
So, thank you, Chris. I'm Sorceress Cagliastro, and I want to say that next week, one of the things I'm going to talk about is sigils when we talk about doing justice sorcery. And that those of you who don't have 23 sigils, it's one of my books, I suggest you get it. I don't usually say it straight out like that, but for this work, I suggest you get it, 23 Sigils of Selfish Indulgence. If you're interested in justice and revenge sorcery, there's some stuff in there that might be very useful to you. I want to thank Chris and Morgan tonight because this has been a really visceral discussion, and there's been people in the chat room tonight who have been really full on and very interested in this process. I invite them to come back next week so that they can understand more of what the possibilities are when we talk about ritual in this area. The way to find me, put Sorceress Cagliastro in Google, and you'll have more information than you could ever want. My website is cagliastro.theironring.com, and I want to be really clear that beginner classes are starting as well as core classes, and they're starting next week. There's a couple of spots left. And you'll find all that at cagliastro.theironring.com, one word. Or you can just email me at sorceresscagliastro, Cagliastro with an A, sorceresscagliastro@gmail.com, and make it as simple as possible. I look forward to your emails. I thank you for your time, and I look forward to the completion of the discussion about justice next week. Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.